All right, welcome back. We are changing topics back to, well, H632, but also updates on River Corridor. Anyway, we're welcoming Rebecca Pfeiffer back. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Sheldon. As the Chair said, my name is Rebecca Pfeiffer, for the record, from the Vermont Agency of Natural Resources. I also have with me today, if there's any questions or anything, Rob Evans, who's our Rivers Program Manager, who joined me today. So I wanted to thank you for having me back. We got cut short a little bit. So we were back towards the end of the slides that I was just presenting and talking about the Flood Safety Act, Act 121. And some of the work that we've been doing. We talked a little bit about some of the work and where we're at. And I wanted to just quickly, kind of as a refresher, talked a little bit about the floodplain regulations, the state minimum floodplain standards, as well as the legislative committee for the state's role in the NFIP. So how we might help to support towns from a permitting standpoint with floodplain regulations. That was one of the pieces of Act 121. I backed up a slide or two just to then talk about the river corridor work that is also part of Act 121 for our program around river corridors. So one of the key pieces before going into rulemaking is amending our river corridor map with infill maps. So identifying areas in downtowns where we have more developed places where we don't have the likelihood of the river re-achieving equilibrium and movement. And so we're basically creating areas that are kind of like a permitting exemption is likely how it would be set up. It's similar to how we function now under Act 250 and in communities that may have local river corridor regulations where we look at these infill areas. So areas with denser development, the big key in those places is trying not to get closer to the river to avoid erosion hazards. The other piece so with the infill mapping, I had mentioned that right now we're prepping for our large master contract to kind of do all the technical aspects of the Flood Safety Act, one of them being the infill mapping. Internally, we've been doing, I think I'd mentioned, we've been kind of keying up a lot of our base map, because once this becomes a live state regulatory layer, we would imagine somewhat similar to the FEMA maps. If there's a question, am I in the river corridor? Am I not in the river corridor? Do the regulations apply to me? We're going to have people who are going to look for some sort of appeal process or a process to make a determination. So we're looking at some of our base layers that will then go into informing the infill mapping.
So if you would just help walk the committee through that map a little bit.
Sure,
What's
yeah.
that map mean? When are we using infill mapping versus nope, there's no eligibility for infill?
That's a really good question. So right now, I think that you had heard testimony from Lauren Oates from the Nature Conservancy previously about some of the infill mapping pilot project that they had launched as the Flood Safety Act was being discussed, to kind of give a head start to us to look at some of the downsides, what are the hurdles that we might face, how might that work? So from that, what we looked at in that pilot study, what was looked at were 4 or 5 communities at how would infill mapping work. When we've done it before within our own program, we've looked at designated downtowns. So village centers, that are tied to the Agency of Commerce and Community Development's designations. Or we've looked at areas when we've worked with an individual community who wants to have river corridor maps, we've worked with them to look at densely settled areas. And worked on an infill map. From this statewide process, we will likely be starting with some of the communities, probably not a statewide infill map, but probably looking at communities possibly tying together some of the Tier 1A, Tier 1B mapping that's also happening kind of concurrently with Act 250. I'm assuming that we would probably start in some of those locations because those are the areas where we have some of the densest infill. And so with the mapping master contract, I think that's where we would identify how many, where, what's the process. This is from the picture that's up on the screen is from the TNC pilot program. This is the Johnson map. And they gave an example of how they would overlay wetland areas, how they would also then overlay and look at parcel outlines. And again, looking at places where you wouldn't want to be closer to the river. So in this proposal, those areas in orange are basically a greenlit area for infill. And part of what we've had the discussion about internally is, what is it greenlit for? Is it no permit? Is it only of a certain type of development? And I think that's what we would probably be looking at in the conversations in the public, is like, what does the infill area mean? And what kind of development can or would not occur in those areas? One of the ways that we've looked at the river corridor at this point is basically an intensity of use type of an approach. So it's a parking lot now, it's a paved parking lot, it's a dirt parking lot, gravel parking lot. That's not as much of the concern. It's more that we don't want to now put housing on top of a parking lot and say that's infill. Because you're intensifying the potential for risk. Because even though these are areas that may not become areas that the rivers may occupy, because they're in these denser downtown areas, we're also thinking of risk. So we don't want to have a 40-unit apartment building on the top of the river just because it had previously been a parking lot, because we're now putting people who might be like, 40 units of housing. You have 40 families that you may need to evacuate during a flood event. A lot of times with fluvial erosion events, they happen quickly because it means it's tied more to the erosion or movement of the stream and river. So I think we're probably going to have a proposal as we're doing a lot of our outreach of, how do we define this intensity of use? Do we say in certain areas that it is far enough from the river on the edges of the river corridor, and there's a lot of other infill, or are we going to look at kind of a subset of what happens? Again, like thinking of that intensity of use. So if it's commercial property, trying not to convert it to a residential property. If it's parking lot, we're trying not to convert it to buildings. So keeping a similar land use. The other thing I just wanted to mention again too is that we've been doing a lot of what's been called for in Act 121 is the education and outreach work to speak to a variety of different user groups, essentially, or just constituents on their impressions, understanding around river corridors, and better understanding what challenges they may face, what their thoughts are on it. The other thing that I spoke about, so right now we have been working, TNC and Lake Champlain Sea Grant has been organizing outreach and education webinars all around the state. And we've been partnering with them in like helping to get the word out. We've usually been attending them, not every single one. They're doing the presentations, but we've been there in attendance with them as they've been trying to get the word out. We also had done, we had contracted with Two Rivers Ottaquechee Regional Commission. So under Act 154 from the 2022 session, we had the environmental justice law was passed in Vermont. And so part of what we're tasked with and what we take very seriously is understanding the impacts of this legislation on environmental justice focused populations. Because there's a benefit if we're not having or increasing risk in floodplains and river corridors, obviously, but there's also a downside. I spoke a little bit, I think Commissioner Kamen had, in the morning before I spoke before, had talked a little bit about the magnitude of this bill in relation to the 3-acre stormwater bill and the 2014 Shoreland Protection Act. What we see in most river corridors and floodplains is it's disproportionately tends to be people who have less means and ability to recover after flooding. So that also means if you have a regulatory program that might impose new regulations, there may be some sort of cost to that or an impact that may be negative. So in the contracts that we did with Two Rivers Ottaquechee, we specifically had they had subcontracted out to look in southern Vermont and central Vermont at just kind of listening and bringing up what are some of the impacts of floods and flooding, what are the perspectives that you have to start to kind of jumpstart a lot of that education and outreach and information around environmental justice focused populations. So this is where I left off. Check. Okay. So I don't want to run out of time again.
We can go over also a little, I think.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, but if you don't think he needs a half an hour. 5 minutes, does he?
Set up now.
Yeah.
So some of the testimony I think that you had also had is like, this is already established. We already have a flood hazard area in River Port, our FARC rule. I think Legislative Counsel Mike O'Grady had spoken about our existing FARC rule in some of the rundowns you had done. And so we do have a rule. It was required by Act 138 in 2012. And so we do have a statewide permit, a FARC permit. So it looks at floodplain development and it looks at development in river corridors. But it's very focused on three very key, sectors that towns aren't allowed to regulate. This was meant to be almost like a stopgap measure. Local zoning laws in Vermont only allow towns to regulate certain things. And so things that towns can't regulate in floodplains, the state has to take over in lieu of the towns doing that work. So that's what this rule was created for, to fill that gap. And so it's focused on power generation and power transmission. So solar, dams that aren't regulated by Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. I'm like, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission.
It's a little too close to your acronym.
I know, I'm like, which one is it? We talked about that. We're like, we should probably change that acronym. So power transmission, like large transmission lines. And we're looking at agricultural and silvicultural practices. So we're already working with Agency of Ag and other agricultural sector partners in regulating activities on farms that occur in floodplains and river corridors. And there's also the state facilities. So any state-owned and operated facilities, we regulate to the park. So it's a very, very specific subset that we're regulating that doesn't kind of broadly translate into what we're talking about here. So I think part of what our consideration and thought of, we have kind of I think probably most similar to what our statewide rule would be our work through Act 250. So under Act 250, we comment under Criterion 1D to a district commission about meeting the standards of Criterion 1D for the floodplain and river corridor standards. But as I'm sure probably a lot of you recognize, that's going to be a handful of projects here and there across the state. And typically those are projects that we're doing a lot of one-on-one, project development, project review, lots of technical assistance with applicants to develop a project that avoids floodplain or river corridor impacts, or again, tries to minimize it to the best ability. Something that we would find would meet our procedure, kind of what we've already have established. So just kind of going down in closing, this is not meant to read the actual Gantt chart that's up here, because that would be a little overwhelming, but just trying to show kind of all the different pieces of the act that are part of what the Rivers program is tasked with. And everything that's highlighted in green, again, we can provide this if you wanted to see it, but just looking at kind of all of the different things and all the things that we've at least begun and initiated work on.
I think it would be helpful to get that so we could read it.
Sure, we can provide that for you. Like I said, I almost didn't put the slide in here, but could offer it because then the natural tendency is like, what does that say in there? So we can provide.
We're being asked to change timelines. Having this would really be helpful.
That's no problem to provide that. Okay, so now I'm making a little bit of a hard turn. So I can pause here if you want to talk a little bit more about the Flood Safety Act and timelines, but I had heard conversation in the committee over a couple of different witnesses and on different days about flood insurance, questions about flood insurance. So my role in A&R is the state floodplain manager. So we have funding from FEMA to our office to support positions. So I wanted to provide some information about flood insurance, but I could hold this if you wanted to talk more specifically about Flood Safety Act.
I would like to take a Flood Safety Act moment here. And I guess I need you to help me understand our river corridors. How many of them are you considering mapped? I mean, back when I was doing this, I thought we'd mapped an awful lot of them. And now we're hearing we need to remap them. And so help me understand that.
It's not so much that we're remapping them. What we have, so the legislation we have in the state mapped all river corridors down to a quarter square mile watershed. So like an area of land drained to a quarter square mile. Those are available right now on the Vermont A&R outlets for people to view. I like to parallel it to FEMA maps because some people may have seen FEMA maps, but there's different qualities of floodplain mapping that FEMA provides. There's zone A's where they're kind of approximate areas that tend to be in smaller populations or places where you don't have a large population. So the data that goes into mapping them is not as refined and is not as detailed. And then you have studied reaches on big rivers like downtown Montpelier, lots of like flood heights, lots of information that goes into the modeling and engineering behind that. And our river corridors, I think of it in somewhat of a similar way. The Flood Safety Act looks at river corridors that are 2 square mile watershed drainages or greater. And we have a variety of quality of data that's gone into them over the years. So we have some river corridor background data that was generated in the early 2000s. And we have some that have been more recently updated with field assessed data. Over the years, we also created kind of like filling in where we didn't have that field data to provide some sort of map on the front end. As we became more involved in Act 250 reviews and we had towns adopting river corridor maps, we had like field assessed data and then we had areas where we had nothing. So we created like I think it was post-Irene, the mid-20 teens, where we created a statewide river corridor map. So we created something along the lines of almost like more approximate river corridors where we didn't have field assessed data to be able to provide some predictability on the front end for Act 250 projects or for towns looking to regulate river corridors. So part of what we're trying to do is go back to revisit some of the base layers that went into that. So we talked a little bit about valley walls. Like the river typically is not going to go uphill, into mountains. And so with our base layers, we're trying to use LiDAR to help to refine some of those areas. And we're also looking at kind of revisiting where some of those river corridors are drawn. So it's almost like a QA/QC that we typically do when we have an Act 250 project come up. We do that as the project comes up. Does the river corridor layer data that we have make sense given what we see on the site? And we do that for all of our Act 250 projects. Or if we're helping a town review a project in the river corridor, we're going to pretty much every single site that there is a proposal for to field verify our river corridor data. And so what we're anticipating is with a statewide program, the ability for us to engage as deeply in QA/QC those on the ground. We're still going to likely be doing that, but I think we're trying to update the data with the best available data we have now, which is using LiDAR to verify those valley walls to help make sure where we don't have field assessed data, it's kind of the best representation of the river corridor ahead of time so that it should hopefully lead to less back end refining of the map for the site.
Can you tell me what percent of the river corridors that would be regulated under the Flood Safety Act we have field verified data for?
I can't off the top of my head. I would turn to you to see if
Yeah,
to Rob.
Rob Evans, for the record, Rivers Program Manager. Of the 5,600 miles, this is rough numbers, I can get a finer number for you. I think about 3,000 miles of those 5,600 they've been refined based on our detailed phase 2 data like you used to collect, Chair Sheldon, field-based valley walls. So there's approximately, 2,000, 2,500 miles where it's not based on LiDAR, it was based on the 30 meter digital elevation models to define that kind of toe of the slope valley wall. And so we think we owe it to the regulated community and property owners to have as accurate a map as we can. We're doing statewide regulation. Right now, we give any project proponent the benefit of the doubt. They propose something, they say, oh, what I want to do is in a river corridor. We send out a staff scientist to make sure our map is right. When we're doing this statewide, we're not going to have the staff to do that for every project proposal. So we feel like we owe it to the regulated community to have a more accurate map. And then, of course, we'll have to update our procedure when people want to challenge that.
Yeah, I guess where I'm headed here is, of course, we want folks to have accurate mapping, but we have accurate mapping for a lot of the state. And We also have a lot of pressure to build housing in this moment. We have a lot of newly exempted areas from Act 250. I'm hearing mostly your projects are getting triggered under that umbrella. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I have a lot of concern about new investments in vulnerable places, in particular, because we know, as you mentioned, this is an environmental justice issue. And we've seen these projects popping up. And as we extend the deadlines on this legislation, I just want to make sure we're sort of abiding by first do no harm here and not adding more investments in places we know are going to be vulnerable to erosion hazards. I mean, and I know the statute gives flexibility to roll it out with the areas that are mapped well, we can start with those. So help me understand the date extension requests.
I share your concern. I mean, like I said at the first meeting, I've been doing this for my whole career. And so this is something our program has worked for. I think my concern is kind of staggering and stair-stepping some of it. So 1 year in this grand process, this big, huge process is a lot. It is a lot, but I'm also concerned that if we roll it out and it is not well thought out, if we don't have the language around like, how do you appeal our maps? Do we have the staff capacity to look and verify all these river corridors before a project is reviewed? And our answer is we don't have staff to do that, or we don't have the ability to send out people to all these different sites being proposed. Or the other piece of it is that people don't know enough about it and so are continuing to build. And then we're on the other side of it where we're doing enforcement cases because those take a lot of time. And I'm not trying to downplay that, but I'm also concerned, me personally, I'm concerned with the way that that will draw my staff away from doing the permitting work to then doing enforcement. Because it is a really time-consuming piece to do it, and it takes years to play out versus trying to have the word out on the street ahead of time so people know this is coming and what to expect, having some of that information on the front end. So I think that's the perspective that I personally bring to it. I can't speak for everyone else in the program, but I think that, you know, that is the at the discretion of the committee, at the legislature, as to the timelines. I think we've learned from the rollout of the Shoreline Protection Act. We've learned from the rollout of the 3-acre stormwater rule of like having upfront notice for people to know the regulations are changing, because we're going from a program that has no, you know, like in Act 250 and in a handful of municipalities that they have the river corridor regulations to now all of a sudden a statewide program. And so that knowledge, and I think the understanding of that is not insignificant. You know, we talked about 45,000 parcels that this would now cover. And so I guess it's all a balance. It's all a balance.
Well, it's a maybe. I mean, I guess we have these exempt areas in our downtown right now, for better or worse. And I'm thinking, here we are methodically mapping the infills. That's great. I totally support that. But if we're taking in particular public dollars, but any dollars, because we know when our neighbors get flooded out, we tend to pass the hat and try and help them out. So I guess I'd like some assurances that we're not doing a lot of infill, particularly dense infill in the places we know are going to flood in this time frame. And I guess the comparison to the other two programs, I understand from the administrator's point of view, maybe, but this is a public safety issue that is very different from cutting trees on the shoreland or even retroactively dealing with stormwater. So it is pretty different.
It is. I think it's more about the scale and the outreach efforts of what that took, more meant to be the comparison, more so than the programs themselves. I don't disagree with you. I mean, I think, like I said, we looked at projects across the state all the time. And I always say, it's like, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Everywhere you drive, you see it.
Yes, and so I see it since I was doing work center for me.
Yes. Yeah, it is. And I mean, I think, again, that's the discretion of the legislature, of the committee in your conversation and in your consideration. I think part of it for me is like trying to have these pieces inform. And, you know, I'm thinking of that legislative committee as being a piece that's informing what that level of the state regulation of floodplain areas may be, or other players who might be in that place instead of town. So thinking of it as this larger Like, I'm not just thinking of river corridor legislation, I'm thinking of as much bigger FARC permit, flood hazard area and river corridor permit. So thinking of how one rolls into the other. And I think that is part of like what informs the other. If there's a change to those priorities of the legislation or of the work items, that is something that, that's something the committee can consider or can discuss. But we've seen part of the conversation in 2024 during the testimony, especially in the Senate, in Senate Natural Resources, was around kind of like the initial conversation was just giving the state all of the NFIP regulation in addition to the river corridor regulation. And we were kind of like, this is a lot bigger than what people think it is. And so to change the rule kind of in between and then go back and change the rule again, it's something that we can do, but I think it's probably I think Mike had, Mr. Grady had talked a little bit about the time it takes to go through rulemaking and trying to have that as like a whole package to bring forward. Having that river corridor piece, but also having the flood hazard recommendations to provide to the legislature to consider, so that when we're doing the rulemaking for the FARC permit, it's all being considered as one.
Representative Chapin.
Thanks for walking us all through this and for all the work your team's been doing. I guess I'm sitting here wishing that we were looking at like options A, B, and C. This is the option with the current staff capacity and the current hiring environment and no additional funds, no contractors, or maybe not no contractors. Maybe you're using contractors somewhere in here, but I guess I would love to see plan B, where you ask us for the resources to get this done as soon as possible, ideally like in the original timeframe. But we need to bring in a certain, number of limited service positions or contractors to help us move more quickly. And I know it's not easy to hire, nor even you can't predict when people might leave and you have to refill positions. But I guess I just, as a legislator, I'm agreeing with the chair that this is, my community's flooded twice in 2023 and 2024. And this is a public safety issue, and the people who tend to build homes, particularly non-commercial properties in floodplains, tend to be lower income, not have the same resources, options, access to land. And so I'm, glad that you're working on the environmental justice piece. And I hope that that's going to raise some of those issues, but we already know that that's an issue, and that this is an equity issue and a public safety issue. And so I'm so curious about a plan B that would actually be able to do this work on a tighter timeframe.
I think we can develop something like that. I think from as an initial reaction, I think that we know, we've known since I started, and you're standing on the side of a riverbank with someone who has no options, because even if we did a full buyout of their property, they cannot go anywhere else to spend that money to buy another home or have safe housing. So we've known this as an issue for a very long time. I think what we're trying to really be thoughtful about, because it's so much bigger than floodplains and river corridors. It is a whole societal response about how do we have safe housing for people, or places for people to go to if they're choosing or not able to stay in their home where it is now. I think we're trying to have a thoughtful, like, how do we look at this permitting program in a way that can consider, like, if we're going to say you've been substantially damaged, it's a technical FEMA term, you incur a lot of damage after a flood. And I can define it more specifically, but you're substantially damaged, you're required to mitigate your homes. And we have folks, like, we've been working with caseworkers from all areas of the state where there are outside, like, non-state caseworking entities, long-term recovery groups. And it's so much bigger than this, because it's like trying to choose what they're going to repair and what they're not going to repair. Where are they going to find funds? And if they make this one change, does that now create a situation where they're substantially damaged, but they're also trying to improve their heating and efficiency, or whatever it might be? It's a really complex thing. And I'm not trying to pass this. I think we're trying to think about how does the work that we're doing affect folks when we're saying you need to, mitigate your home maybe 2 feet above the FEMA flood elevation. Right now, you're 3 feet below it. That's like lifting your home in the air. How does that happen? How do you have access to funds? Who do we need to talk to, and how we bring that to this situation? how do we preferentially work with VEM to look at hazard mitigation funding for people who may have to do this because of this rule? And from a river corridor standpoint, from a flood inundation where the water gets high and comes back down, you have some options potentially to stay in your home with river corridors. I think to Chair Sheldon's point, the concern is that the river is moving and it's erosion. And a lot of times you don't really have options to shore up your home. It's a matter of, do we have a buyout here or not? But every home in the river corridor is not created equal. So we have places in really, densely developed downtown areas. We may have homes that are in river corridors that are further to the edge. And they have other development between them and the river. And so like every home that's in a river corridor has some risk associated with it. The river corridor, though, is not predicting where the river may move. It's the area that the river needs to help to manage the balance. The river water, the sediment, and the debris that's coming down during the flood. And so I guess part of me is, we could come up with different scenarios and alternative timelines, but I don't know how much some of those may provide relief because of the time. We're just starting to get to the point where we're getting relief from a staffing standpoint. We've hired 4 of our 5 positions. We have had them on board. We're just about coming up to a year with those first hired folks. And in the next couple of months. So we're starting to get that staff capacity. And if we had let's just say, I'm not saying this, but let's just say we had 20 positions, the time it would take to hire them, train them, and bring them on is not necessarily going to save us more time. And we do have contractual funding that was provided in 2024, and that's what's going to be funding those master contracts that we have under development. We actually have a meeting tomorrow that we scheduled a while ago to talk about what is the breakdown of funding for different aspects of those master contracts. So we have one that we're going to be looking at, kind of think of it as the technical contract that might look at infill mapping, updating our river corridor procedure in preparation for the rulemaking changes. And then we have one that's more focused on outreach and like getting the word out, listening, understanding, hearing, and really trying to promote and have that wider public awareness that this is coming. You will need a permit and you are mapped in the river corridor. What we're also anticipating, I think Rob had testified in 2024 about is like similar to FEMA maps. Once this becomes a regulatory layer, there is now that consideration of, does someone need to appeal this designation? I need a permit for what I want to do. I don't think I'm in a river corridor. And so what is that process? How do we look at those? And does that take as much or more time than, like I was talking, we go on a town by town or site by site review of the river corridor? So we're trying to think about what does that process mean and how does that scale up? And it might not be the type of workload that we're anticipating, but I'm thinking about like when people are potentially going to be selling or buying homes or businesses, they're going to say, wait, I don't want to, like, I'm in a river corridor. What does that mean for when I sell this home, or what does that mean? And right now we don't necessarily have an answer for that of like, how do we, like now we ad hoc kind of change the map. So go to the site, take a look at the basin information, change the map, and or we have a letter kind of like waiving that river corridor requirement if it's changed on the site. How does this work going forward? If we're going to have tens of them, or we're going to have hundreds of them. So I think from other different scenarios to get the work done, I think we're kind of at the precipice of having capacity to do more of this work and have our senior staff being able to focus on it. There may be other alternatives of, obviously I'm just kind of responding to this as you mentioned it, but I don't think it's something that would be difficult to at least put together some other alternatives to see if there are things that are workable or other considerations of how the legislation moves forward.
Just to jump in here, I just want to assure the committee that, asking for the delay is not us putting it on the side burner for a year. We're every hour and minute that we have available to work on it, we're working on it. I hope when you can digest this, you actually have a copy that's readable, you'll see that we've initiated on most of the tasks work, and we're spending as much time as we can. We have a lot of competing priorities. We have a meeting on Thursday that we just got pulled into. We're still dealing with flood recovery funding for the wastewater treatment facilities for 3 communities, and VEM needs our technical assistance. That's not discretionary work where we say, sorry, VEM and Ludlow and Johnson and Hardwick, we have to focus on the Flood Safety Act. So we're trying to balance our core work with building this out, but we want to do this work. We're committed to do this work. But we just, as we testified in 24, we didn't think 3.5 years was enough time then. Quite frankly, I think I said, you have to maybe go back to the record. I think I said in 24, that session, if we get another flood, you could add another year. We did get another flood. We're still largely on track. The 18 months to hire, train new staff, program the contractual funding, we're pretty close. We're a couple months delay, but not 6 months delay. So I think we're, all things considered, in a good place. If we can not have a big flood this summer, we're gonna make a lot of headway this year. Make a lot of headway this year. We owe those
Like,
infill
don't
maps this
say it.
month, next year, based on.
Don't say.
Yeah.
Well, it's, back to you, I think your question about various scenarios or plans is a great one, but to me, there's the X factor, which is between now and 2028. Are we lucky enough to not have any major floods and we can really focus on this? Or do we get redirected? When a big flood hits, it's all hands on deck for 6 months. And then the steady drip of work. But
Yeah.
anyway, we're committed to this work. We realize how important it is and the public safety, life safety components associated.
Understood and grateful for everything you guys do. Thanks.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and we know that, and I guess so. I'm wondering about, would there be some temporary things we could do to prevent the scenario that I'm talking about, which is like a giant affordable housing project in an inappropriate, now Act 250 exempt area? Like, and I know people think, who would want to do that? Well, I think there are people out there who want to do that. And I think we need to not make towns have to litigate to stop something like that, or whoever. And maybe that's something we should be looking at. And I want to be aware that I want you to get through your last few slides.
Oh.
We have other folks here waiting.
Question about flood insurance. I mean, would flood insurance determine where places could be built?
I think that's a good segue, because the next little few slides are flood insurance.
It's like, you
Uh-huh.
set that up. For flood insurance,
Representative North.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I just, one brief question on the same topic, because I agree that it's very challenging to consider pushing these dates out given the danger. But Rob, when you were here earlier, you had mentioned that the half square mile change for the stream headwaters could free up some resources. So to assume that that's going to go through, how much resources does that free up to help pull this stuff in?
That actually doesn't translate, just because that's a different section in my program that does a completely different body of work than this. They just need their current core work to be more manageable. So that doesn't free them up to pivot and work on this, unfortunately.
Any of them?
No.
Because they're engineers looking at particular projects.
That was my question.
No, it's a fair question.
Yeah, it is a fair question.
Absolutely.
Okay.
If you can combine them and do them both at the same time.
Well, yeah, we have had conversations through the years, like not in earnest because they kind of overlap, but in so many different ways that it's a good question, because especially when we had the FARC rule, like, are there ways that the engineers might be able to approve or issue FARC permits on, instead of us in certain situations? And it's just kind of all over because they have certain jurisdictions, they don't actually issue permits when they're working with VTrans, they issue consultation. It's just, most of our work ends up being with VTrans for state facilities. It became too messy to try to figure out how we could gain some of that efficiency of having different regulators in the program. Flood insurance questions. To your question, Representative Morris, for flood insurance, Austin, I was looking at your name plaque right there. And
I
was like,
know you knew.
I
knew
know.
you knew.
I know, I'm like, I'm sorry. It was one of those anyway, so I was like, anyway. Whether or not flood insurance can change whether or not people can develop in certain areas, and how does that work? Flood insurance can be purchased by any person who lives in a community that is part of the National Flood Insurance Program. Earlier in the slides, when I was here before, I had a map that shows all the towns that are in and not. Flood insurance is available to anyone in those communities, so it's not an off limits type of thing, and it runs differently than most other insurances because many policies, but not all, are issued through the National Flood Insurance Program or through a write your own company that's writing on behalf of the NFIP. About a decade ago, there was major changes in how flood insurance program was, how the flood insurance portion of the program was run. So there is private flood insurance that is now part of the larger world of insurance. So actually my second slide on flood insurance speaks a little bit of that. I can go back to the previous slide. But this DFR, Division of Financial Regulation, like we don't get information as a state on how many private flood insurance policies are written. We only understand that through the NFIP because that's a public program. So DFR, after the 2023 flood event, their folks had called all the different carriers who offer insurance in the state to ask how many private flood insurance policies there were. So this was just post 2023. A little more than half of the policies were written through the NFIP. About a little less than half were private flood. Anecdotally, and I don't know what the numbers are now, I don't know if they've done kind of like a survey since then. I've heard about how people are no longer being able to renew through private flood and are having to go back to the NFIP because they have huge parametric models that look at how they spread their risk in different places, and 2 or 3 floods in a couple of years makes them not really happy to offer flood insurance. So there's been a lot of private flood insurance policies that I think haven't been renewed or not made available. We don't know what those numbers are. But anyone can get a policy. The way that flood insurance policies are now written is no longer, in the end, it used, or about a decade ago, it used to be like, are you in the FEMA mapped floodplain or are you not? Your policy is X per $100 of coverage, your policy. So it was like a yes or no, or like one rate versus another. Now it's a more continuum. They have a whole bunch of different factors that they look at it when they're rating a flood insurance policy. It's much more complex. Even the folks at FEMA, I think, don't know exactly how those different factors interact. There is an online rating page. I don't think I included it in my slides, but I can provide it. It's floodsmart.gov. They have an individual rating page where you can put in your address and they will give you a rate right there. And so I have more information about rating in my hidden slides at the end. And so can always come back or talk more about that or provide some of that now. But it doesn't prevent someone from getting a policy. Prior claims, if it's an NFIP policy, may not have much effect, if at any at all, on the policy itself, on the rating. One of the things, this is the first flood insurance slide that I put in here. There was a question of like, how much does a flood, I think someone on the committee had asked a question, how much is a flood insurance policy? And so the average in Vermont, this was through kind of the end of 2025, the average cost of an insurance policy, flood insurance policy through the NFIP was $2,700, about $2,700. But if you were in a FEMA mapped flood zone, your average policy was almost $4,000, $3,800
A year?
a year. So there is that aspect of it. And we've also seen a steady decline of NFIP policies, I'm sure, as probably some of those costs have gone up, where the affordability issue of it has become more pressing than maybe it had been in the past. So when we look the other one, the 94% uninsured, those are structures in a FEMA floodplain with NFIP policies. But again, we don't know like what the private flood insurance portion may be covering some of that. But I think the bigger message is that there's a lot of people in floodplains who are uninsured. And that usually is the trigger for the purchase of flood insurance, comes from any sort of a federally backed loan or mortgage, and your house is being part of that loan. So you're purchasing a new house and you're using a mortgage for it, you're going to be flagged for potentially needing NFIP flood insurance or some sort of flood insurance coverage. But if it is a cash sale, which we've had a lot of, is my understanding in the past several years, if it's a kind of through the family kind of a sale, then that is not getting flagged for flood insurance.
Lieutenant Pritchard.
So just a question back to the additional staff. Are these folks going to be assisting with the same responsibilities of the 8 that you presently have? I mean, are they going to be, or is this a whole separate program?
It is, it's a great question. So just going back to the slide of the different folks. So in hiring within the River Corridor floodplain in my program, We've hired Rose Watts, Alexis Nevins, Tessie, you see them highlighted there. So Rose, Alexis, and Jess was another vacant position. Those positions are basically taking over as regional floodplain manager. So that's a job that I was doing while also being the state NFIP coordinator and doing state floodplain stuff. So it's basically taking one of those jobs off my plate. And we had Ned Swanberg from our shop, who was a regional floodplain manager, but also managing the map updates from FEMA and also doing the outreach. So it's basically helping to concentrate the roles is maybe a better way. So we have more of like a regulatory team who most of all they're doing is reviewing projects and assisting towns. So reviewing them for Act 250, issuing the state permits, or a majority of our work is actually helping provide technical assistance to communities. And so those positions will just be focusing on that. And now that frees up other staff who are doing that and this job and this job and this job to focus more on the other work. So
So it's trying to spread out the present workload you have to make those folks more specific to the things.
exactly, yep. Yes.
On the workload you had, which I think when you first, on your first presentation, those folks, I think you said 1,800 phone calls a year that you handle and 200 and something permits and
I
seven.
think that was wetlands.
Oh, that was wetlands.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it is a lot. We part of our program is funded as a cooperative agreement with FEMA. I didn't really talk about this in the slide. It funds about 1 to 2 FTEs of our program, positions in our program. And a lot of the workload through that has become a lot more administratively heavy over the past several years. And so what we've found is, again, like that workload has been building. I mean, we have all of those types of numbers if you're interested in like how many so we do development reviews for communities. How many permits do we issue? How many general technical assistances? I mean, on average, our yearly, general technical assistance that kind of across our program, it's 1,800 of them, 1,500 of them a year. For permits, we're usually doing around 90, I think I looked it up, around 90 municipal reviews across the state on average. Obviously, after 23 flood, kind of like end of 23 and into 24, it was a lot higher.
Could you send me that information? Could you
Yes.
send us that?
Yeah, I think when you send the spreadsheet, that would be great to get that.
Yeah, I'll try to make it in a more readable format, but we have all those numbers that we report to FEMA because there's kind of like the FEMA cooperative agreement pays for a portion of our work, but our program actually overmatches that work because there's a greater state investment in our program. And so we probably provide, compared to other states, because we provide so much on the ground technical assistance to towns, we don't really have other states in the country that have a similar type of program. I think Montana may be the closest to that, where they're helping towns to actually review projects. But we have a very formal statute that has towns submitting them to us for our review and assistance to make sure they're reviewing them correctly. Things aren't being permitted in the wrong way.
Thank you.
Sure.
Sorry for getting my agencies crossed. I think the other folks had eight employees too, right?
Yeah.
We are bumping up past the time. Thank you so much for coming back. Probably have more questions for you.
I'm can come back anytime.
Great.
Talk about this stuff whenever you would like to.
Thank you.
I was gonna offer, if you're interested, but you may not be, the reports that we do have from Two Rivers, Ottaquiche, if you're interested in seeing them, we could always provide those as well.
I think we might have that interest.
Okay. I was gonna send them to Kat earlier to him, but we'll see if the committee actually wants to see them or not.
And we'll invite you back to quiz us to make sure we've read them.
How much have you?
Really good at talking to you, might be a little bit less good at reading all the reports, but we do
I
our.
understand that. And I know we're transitioning here, but I didn't want to undersell the chaos of our FEMA grant over the past year. We've had a lot of changes in that grant, a lot of increase in the administration of that, stop work orders, change the contracts that we already had on the ground. So that's also,
That's
Been-
helping you get this work done faster, I bet.
well, we've had a few of those conversations about like, what is the cost of the free money from FEMA?
Yeah, fair enough.
So,
Thank you very much for your work and for coming.
thank you all. Thank you for your time.
Sounds here.
See if it works.
Jeff, for your chair, you can also-
Thank you.
I don't know. Let's see if it works for us.
Love that you're doing the IT support over there, Sarita.
I know.
Well, I think I was the notification
We're shutting off.
offender and I don't know how to do it, so.
All over it.
And my volume kept going up in spite of my desperate pushing of it.
Okay, you did well. We've had some really stunning reverberation sounds, so that was nothing compared to the sound. Uh-oh,
Guess that didn't work.
Hey, shut the sound off.
we'd have to go to bed. Are you sure it's?
That's what we just
That's what we
did.
At any rate, how about if you all introduce yourself?
So, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee, my name is Bill Smith. I'm a contract lobbyist in the building and an attorney with an office in Northfield. I've been practicing law for a little over 30 years and lobbying for about 25 of that. Before the 25, I worked in the clerk's office as one of the assistant clerks, so I was late 90s. It was a bit ago. With me, I'm working for the Fire Equipment Manufacturers Association. With us today is Steve Duke from Vermont Fire Equipment in Barry, but statewide service to commercial properties that require fire extinguishers through the fire code. And also this is Jeff Terry from Rasky Partners. Jeff, for the last 23 years or so, has worked for Fire Equipment Manufacturers Association. I'm trying not to use the word FEMA, the acronym FEMA. I know that's taken already, but this one actually predates that, 1930. So there you go. So Jeff's with us, and also online we've got Dwayne Garris, who is the former fire marshal for the state of Georgia and is also a contractual expert for the association. So between Jeff and Dwayne, you've got kind of this national perspective on this issue, and Steve and myself, you've got your in-state perspective on it. So let me just back up, and if I could, and I'd like to hand it over soon to Steve and to Dwayne to talk about the nitty-gritty of what we're looking for. But the big picture is 3 years ago, we passed Act 58, which as part of it had in it requirements for manufacturers of covered products to take care of end-of-life management, consumer education. There was going to be fees for that the manufacturers that are out of state would be paying. And one of the concerns that was raised at that time that meant you included, generally speaking, fire extinguishers in the bill was that there were fire extinguishers showing up at our solid waste districts for recycling, right? To going into this waste stream here. And this group last summer, as we went toward implementation of this through Agency of Natural Resources, was going into the implementation of this process for the manufacturer funding of these programs, was that they came to me through Jeff to say, hey, what can we do about this in Vermont? These companies are different than sort of your residential household fire extinguishers. These are the manufacturers of the one that you have in the corner over there that keeps you safe quietly over there without you even knowing about it, is made by one of our members, Amerex, and serviced by Impact Fire, one of our distributors based out of Williston. Steve's company is a distributor like Impact is for, again, they have very broad service districts that he can get into on that. So last spring, I there was some legislation going, in fact, you had H319 came out of this committee, right? That this would have been maybe a good amendment for that bill. It could be a good proposal to put into that bill. Not aware of that moving on. I wasn't hired yet either. I mean, we talked about this in late May at the end of session. So I did talk to the chair of Senate Natural Resources and said, what can we do? Can this be added to H319 or what? And she said, well, lots of 319 is going into another bill, the miscellaneous ag bill, would be the relevant section, if you may recall that. She said, but I want you to go to Age Natural Resources and solid waste districts, talk to them and find out if there's something you can deal with separate from this, or if you need to come back to the legislature and ask for a solution to this issue. So that's what happened. We did go to ANR in the fall. I spoke to the solid waste folks about this around the Christmas time scenario, Christmas time timeframe. And we haven't really come up with anything yet. So it does seem like a legislative solution is something we're going to be requesting of you. And it seemed like, first of all, I'd say, this committee, when you decided to crank out a bill, you move. So I also knew that when I saw H632 was introduced a couple of weeks ago, it wouldn't be here too long. And so that's why I approached the chair last week to see if we could get some committee time to talk about perhaps adding this to H632. So that's kind of the procedural status of where we're at. If we've got here, Kat, could I share my screen here? Is that? It hasn't come up on the bottom of it, allowing me to do it. It's not. You could. I can go to, that's my screen. What do you need to do? It came back up again. Should get us to. Let me go to the.
We did our 3 o'clock hash today in the kitchen.
Here we go. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Ms. Morgan. Much appreciated. I like people with skills that I don't have. So this is a one pager and a proposed amendment here. If you look at it, we'll go through these issues here, but these are the highlights we'll talk about today. And then here's the proposal to add to H632 if you see fit to do that. Key thing there are taking the extinguishers out of the gas cylinder definition, and we'll talk about why that is. And then making clear that covered household hazardous product does not include portable fire extinguishers if they're sold, installed, inspected, or maintained pursuant to the fire code or otherwise sold for industrial or commercial purposes. In other words, they're going to be in the programs that Steve's company and Impact Fire service for them, so that they can ensure that there's going to be safe fire suppression in these older buildings we have in Vermont, whether they're an office building or a state house or a residential apartment block in downtown North. So having said that, Jeff, should I just look to you to kind of give a perspective on this, or just?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you guys very much for the opportunity to talk today. We really appreciate it. So, Steve, if you can jump in, really, I think what we want to hear about is, kind of the life cycle of a commercial industrial extinguisher. They're designed to really be used, reused, serviced, maintained, ultimately recycled for years and years and years, as opposed to your residential extinguisher that you might buy at Home Depot that you use once and try to dispose of or whatnot. So Steve, you can kind of talk through your business, what you do and how it works.
Sure. My name is Steve Dupe. I'm Vermont Fire Extinguisher. We cover all of Vermont, part of New Hampshire, and a little bit of New York. On the road every day dealing with these things. A fire extinguisher has a 6-year life before its first test. Okay, in 6 years, you tear it apart, make sure it's good, you put it back together, it goes back on the shelf. In 12 years, you do the same thing, and that continues for its whole life cycle. The only thing that would take it out of service would be if the label is unreadable and or damage, you know, the cylinder has a severe damage or it fails one of those tests. So these things are designed to live a long time. The ones that come out of service now are pre-1984. April of 1984 is when the NFPA changed their standard. And it was due to, excuse me, guys, a UL rating, okay? The UL listed rating, all right? The rating is 711-299. If you find that on the back of an extinguisher, it can be reused and reworked and put back into service, as long as everything is fine. As far as these guys talking about the Central Vermont Solid Waste, I have a deal with those guys. They bring me the ones that can't be worked on, and we recycle it. We take the powder out of them. We remove the pressure so that they're no longer a hazard, and then recycle them, like a Bulldogs or that type of thing. But
You recycle them where?
at Bulldogs, you know, like the metal portion of it would go there. The powder portion I save. For an example,
You just give us a sense of the chemicals that are involved.
yeah, ammonium phosphate fertilizer. Straight fertilizer. So it's not a hazardous material. If you'd like your lawn to be really green, you could spray one of them on your lawn and it will actually turn it super green.
And the gas that they're pressurized with, that's used to expel the material, nitrogen.
Yeah. You can use nitrogen or you can use air. You can use straight air, but it has to be dry. Because of the powder, obviously, if you introduce any moisture into that, then it's probably not gonna work real good for you. So nitrogen is how they're pressurized. They're pressurized under 195 PSI for the one like that one on the wall.
So we've, I guess I want to understand, you're taking any of them back if Shindon's or anybody Solid Waste District calls?
Just Central Vermont for now.
Okay, so Central Vermont.
Yeah, I mean, there's other companies in that area. They should be doing their part to do that as well.
I mean, these were included because they are a hazard for the collectors of a danger of exploding.
Physical hazard, correct?
Yes.
Because of the pressure.
Yeah.
They're not a chemical hazard.
Well, I'm not sure. You tell me the range of chemicals in any collection of fire extinguishers. Like, I think probably some are hazardous.
Well, if a halon comes in, which is the same stuff that protects your building here with your computer systems. This place has an old halon system. It's probably put in the mid-80s.
Would you have been able, would you see a household hazardous? Would this be household?
No, absolutely not.
Extinguisher would be halon or?
No, if halon and that type of stuff is all completely industrial. There's no reason for a homeowner to have that. All halon, FM 200, all these other, they're called clean agents, okay? They're clean because they don't make a mess. So like if your computer room has a fire, you can do that, it won't burn your computer up. You dust that thing off in your computer room, that has conductive properties and it would ruin every last bit of your computer room. That's why that's on all the industrial. And anything like that comes in gets recycled through a company out of Ohio. A-Gas is the name of that company. They do a very big recycling project with that. But the stuff we find that comes from Central Vermont Solid Waste would be your typical. It's like a 2.5 pound extinguisher you'd find in your kitchen or in your boat, or you know what I mean? That can't be reworked, can't be recycled. You cannot redo them and rebuild them. We sell only ones that are rebuildable and guaranteed, for 6 years.
And so, but you're taking those household ones?
Yes, I will take them.
How long, you said 6 years, I mean and then you have to retire yours.
Nope, 6 years, then you rework it.
Recharge.
You retest it. Yep, it's a 6 year cycle, so it's 6, 12, 18, 24, they can live on. As long as, like that extinguisher there, man, it lives in this environment, is this is a pretty nice environment, right? It's not going anywhere, it's not getting beat up by weather, it's It's not gonna rust, it's not gonna do anything, it's gonna,
It gets testimony fatigue.
yeah, well, I bet it does.
We better get a new one then.
Yeah, I'll give it to
Representative Taglia.
Just so we understand clearly, you said the fire extinguishers that you get from Chittenden Solid Waste that are mostly the household ones, they are, the material that's inside is still usable. You disable them, take them apart, the metal products would go into a metal recycler, but you are able to still use the product that's inside.
Well, right, a lot of that product that's inside, you will probably not reuse. You may have a manufacturer check it and rework it to make it up to code, you know, I mean, you're not gonna just go take stuff out of, you know, one thing and put it in another, the industry doesn't allow that. But what it does do is like a lot of those, like, let's say they're 2.5 pounds, right? They're 50-pound bucket, you can put do the math, you can do a file in a 50-pound bucket. Well, during this time of year, October, November, a lot of fire departments ask me for that powder. So I donate to them, just give it to them. What they do with it is they will take sandwich bags and fill it full of that powder. You have a chimney fire, they'll climb to the top of your chimney, throw that sandwich bag down through. The sandwich bag melts, the powder releases, the draft pulls the powder up through, puts it out. They don't put any water on your chimney, ruin your fluid, cause you a whole bunch of money. Old school firefighting in Vermont, but you know what? Like I said, I do a lot of that. I donate a lot of that to those type of people, you know, they're always ask.
Members have further questions? All right, Representative
Just a
Morris.
simple question. Thank you, Chair. The recommended changes that you've provided here at the bottom, how vetted are those through the folks on your end, and confident are you that they are the right changes that you want?
Yeah, Dwayne Garris, if you want to jump in and talk about the changes. But yeah, these changes have been, worked on by the general counsels of all of the association members. So, and Dwayne, if you can take it just a second about kind of why we're not a gas cylinder, number one, and then just a little bit also, again, all on the commercial and industrial level, all of these extinguishers, they're required by the Vermont Fire Code to be in there. So, people can't say, okay, if the price of this product is going to increase because there's a new fee on it, I'm not going to use it. No, they're still going to have it per the Vermont Fire Code. Dwayne?
All right, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dwayne Garris. I'm the retired state fire marshal of Georgia. I have about 33 and a half years experience in the fire service side of it, and then have been doing code consulting for the Fire Equipment Manufacturers Association for the past 5 years. Just to let you know a little bit about me, I have a certification as a fire extinguisher technician, a certification of pre-engineered kitchen industrial kitchen system, and the pre-engineered industrial system. So a little bit on that side of it. Just to give you some information, if you think about the gas cylinders that I believe we're talking about here, you can look, if you see, I don't know if you can see that, but those are usually large containers that contain either liquefied natural gas, propane, argon, acetylene. They do contain nitrogen and oxygen that,
I need it bigger. Sorry, I needed to make you bigger, so if you were showing us
Good.
stuff, we could see it.
Oh, okay. I was just showing you a little cylinder, sort of like it's a mini of a gigantic cylinder. But if you think of the things that are on back of like welding trucks, construction trucks, those are the gas cylinders I believe that they're talking about. And the way you can sort of identify those, they usually have things such as, one, they're constructed out of steel, aluminum. They have protection valves, they have relief valves, They have a neck ring usually to protect the valve themselves. They usually have a foot ring because the foot itself is rounded because it's a high pressure cylinder. Those cylinders are usually tested anywhere from 250 to 1,800 pound PSI. And so you're basically taking a gas and compressing it to a liquid, and that's why it makes it a rounded cylinder, because a round circle is the strongest component. Also have a degree in architecture. With a portable extinguisher, the commercial grade portable extinguisher that we're talking about, those are pressurized either with cartridges that have a compressed gas that release them inside the container itself, or that has the gas in the container, but those pressures are usually no more than about 240 pounds at the most. So there's a big difference between 1,800 pounds of pressure pushing a gas into a liquid stage and then letting it expand back into a gas when it's being utilized, versus a pressure to push out powder out of the extinguisher itself. So that's a little bit of the difference between the portable extinguishers. Like I say, they're pressurized usually between 100 and 195, where the LP gas and acetylene and other gases for actual use of hazardous materials are pressurized from 240 to 1,800 pounds per square inch. And those are usually regulated by PHMSA. PHMSA is the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, PHMSA, excuse me. It's usually under the Federal Register 49. Parts 171 through 180 is usually where they're regulated under. So hopefully that tells you and explains a little bit of difference between a gas type cylinder and a portable extinguisher. Again, with the fire codes and standards that are developed for portable extinguishers and the placement of those in a building, they're designed for basically the circular economy. And the reason being is if you just had to replace them every time you used them, you're talking about anywhere from doubling to 3 times the expense, probably going up to $900 a unit each time you use that unit, where the codes and standards are developed to allow them to be recycled. The parts you can, as the gentleman there told you, you can recoup the chemical that's inside the dry powder. If you have hoppers, which a lot of companies have, they can discharge that type of extinguisher back into its same type hopper and then reuse that chemical. If it is a mixed chemical or something that somebody may have serviced and put in the wrong chemical, it certainly can be utilized for training purposes, and also utilized, as he said, in bags that can be dropped down chimneys and stuff with the fire department and things. The key thing I believe that we're trying to deal with is the commercial grade extinguishers are utilized to create layered fire protection, starting at incipient stages of fire, so we don't have to rely hopefully on sprinklers. I mean, it takes a while to get a room up to 165, 170 degrees before a sprinkler would activate. And this gives you an immediate protection for incipient stage fires. So we, as well as the National Fire Marshals Association, I think actually the Vermont, Mike DeRocha is actually still the president of the National Fire Marshals Association, And we believe in layered fire protection and dealing with that. So at this point, I'll stop. See if you have any questions. If you need any further information, explanation, I'll be glad to do that. But again, I think that the idea of these cylinders for the extinguishers is they're recycled each time they're used, and they're tested, they're broke down every 6 years, they're looked at, they're inspected internally and externally. And the decay that would occur would be, as he said, with environmental factors, either, if you're on the coast, you have salt spray stuff sometimes comes in on buildings and stuff, and that is corrosive to metal. And so that's one reason why either they're stainless steel extinguishers or they're painted steel extinguishers to help with that situation. But then, you got sunlight on the hoses and stuff, and those are inspected every year.
I gotta just interrupt a little bit. We have a next witness waiting, and I want to make sure we get to clarity on your ask, and then we're going to need to dive into it a little bit with other folks. So I guess what I'm seeing in the language that might be a little concerning is that all single use you've decided shouldn't come under this household hazardous waste. And what you're representing, your product is not single use, and I guess I need you to speak to that.
So that change, that's removing the single use, that's removing all extinguishers from the definition of gas cylinder. Because they're not considered a gas, they're not a gas cylinder under federal DOT standards, NFPA standards, which is what the Vermont State Fire Code is based on. There's a definition of gas cylinder.
The single use would still be covered under our.
They could still be covered under the household hazardous waste. The household hazardous waste removing in section A, that's removing really the premium product, which is the commercial industrial product. These are expensive products, and they're expensive products for a reason, because they are designed to be used for years and years, decades and decades.
Okay, thank you.
And they're already part of this circular economy.
Do folks have questions? Need clarifications? All right, thanks.
Just,
I knew the fire guy was gonna have to say something.
I fully appreciate the testimony and what you're trying to accomplish, and I do concur with it. But I'm looking at 4B, says covered household hazardous product does not mean any of the following. In Roman numeral 12, portable fire extinguisher sold, inspected or maintained. So are we looking to eliminate these from the household hazardous waste coverage? Would that exempt them from would that exclude these from solid waste districts?
Yes,
for the ones that fall under 12, yes.
yes.
If you're not sold, installed, inspected, or maintained pursuant to the Fire and Building Safety Code, or sold for industrial commercial purposes, and therefore are in these programs that Vermont Fire Equipment.
That the fire equipment companies are handling.
They service it. If you're not within those programs, you would still be, your fire crews would not be.
Okay.
And we just want to correct the technical language of what is a gas cylinder is quite important to this industry because of their understanding of these pressurized vessels that we have, whether it's, helium gas or gas for welding versus these extinguishers.
Right.
No, I fully understand that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm trying to determine if a solid waste district was to receive these, that they would not have to turn them over to a company for disposal. I don't want, in other words, are they exempt or are you still going to include them? And you spoke to that yourself with your company, how you.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, I wouldn't want somebody that has no knowledge of pressure and how things work, playing with stuff, right? Just bring it to us. We're the professionals. We'll handle it. We'll take care of it, make it safe. And like I said, with like a lot of the ones we're talking about are the 2.5 pound.
Yeah.
The ones that you buy them at Home Depot at $39.95, whatever, they come in, the gauge is all crooked and just manufactured horrible, but I'll get a pile of those in. But you know what else we do with those too? Just so the guys are aware, kids camps. We'll do fire trainings.
Yeah.
go, you know what I mean? We'll go down to Lake Fairleigh with all the kids camps, they get a fire. going, Hey, look at this, let's put it out, show them how to use it. So it's, it's educational right along the way. So I do have room for some of that stuff. You know what I mean?
Sure, we appreciate that. How does that request get out to other solid waste districts so that they know that they can receive them, but they can also dispose of fire service company?
We do know that there are some other distributors in Vermont who do have a similar relationship, so.
But I do think Representative Morris, you get to an important point, which is these will be covered under the household hazardous waste, but I don't know, the sort of ad hoc nature of your relationship. I don't know, we need to explore that a little more, but we don't have time. We're gonna shift gears. Thanks for bringing this in.
So this is really interesting.
Thanks for what you do.
Don't worry.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for
Really
listening.
appreciate it.
And thanks, Ms. Morgan, for your help with the.
Great. It's all warmed up for you.
No extra charge.
No.
Thank you.
Cool it off.
Bag, it's like.
Join us. Is Kate still in the Zoom room? I see Mike is in the room and,
Kate's there.
yeah, okay, great. So Kate and Mike, they're with us on the Zoom. Welcome, thanks for joining us.
And thank you. For the record, James Duffy, Joint Fiscal Office. I spent some time watching this committee last year, but I think this is my first time testifying in front of you all. So very glad to meet you all and to be here today. I'm here on behalf of Joint Fiscal Office as well as the House Appropriations Committee. So I joined Joint Fiscal Office in 2024. I spent my first year last session on the revenue side of the JFO shop. This year I'm over on the budget side of things, staffing the House Appropriations Committee. And happy to be here today. Chair Sheldon, I know my understanding was that you hope to hear a bit from JFO and from HAC on the 2027 budget process and sort of the expectations and hopes from the House Appropriations Committee on what they're all hoping to achieve from the committee here, and perhaps also some timeline information on the 27 budget. Does that sound right and correct to you?
It does, thanks.
Okay. Well, that being said, I will just flag for the committee that posted on the committee website today is a copy of a memorandum that was shared from House Appropriations Committee with chairs and vice chairs. You may have seen this already, depending on where it's been posted elsewhere, but this was a memo shared from House Appropriations to standing policy committees to help guide all of your questions and testimony that you'll be hearing from departments and agencies for the FY27 budget cycle. I do have a couple of hard copies here. If anybody in the room would prefer a hard copy to a digital copy. Yeah, they sure will. Sure.
Mike usually likes hard copies.
Yeah.
You got enough for us all.
Yeah. I think I should have enough for everybody.
I have one already, so.
One here. Mike's not here today, but he likes hard phones.
Keep this here for my reference, not leaving here.
Oh, okay.
So I just wanted to share with you all, my intention, unless I'm sure you would prefer otherwise, is not to run through that memo line by line today. But I did want to make sure that all members of the committee have it. I think it's useful in help guiding the committee and members thinking about questions and structure for testimony going forward. There are a couple things I did want to flag from the memo. And before I do that, I think the top line takeaway that I'd like to leave the committee with for today is the complementary role of the policy committees and the appropriations committee. So House appropriators in general, are in general operating at a 30,000 foot level when it comes to the state budget. They're looking at how to appropriate finite resources across all of state government. And for that reason, they really rely heavily on the policy committees, that's all of you and your policy expertise, to help guide the hard prioritization decisions that they have to make when compiling the state budget, right? Being an appropriator is a really brutal exercise in having to make hard decisions among many worthy priorities. And to the extent that the policy committees extract information from department and advocate testimonies throughout the budget cycle and provide the Appropriations Committee with prioritized recommendations, that is really helpful to the Appropriations Committee. So I think that would be my kind of top line starting point for the conversation today. So looking at this memo a bit, I just wanted to flag some potential guiding kind of principles for you all as you start hearing FY27 testimony. Madam Chair, I think I just walked in on maybe what might be one of your first FY27 budget testimonies, just from what I heard at the end. Is that right?
No.
You all started hearing FY27?
No, that was not related to the budget.
Okay, great. Well, so the BAA is on the House floor this week, which means House Appropriations has just this week really started in earnest, moving on to FY27. You all will be hearing from House Appropriations, I would say likely in the next 2 weeks or so, with a formal solicitation of your all input on this committee's budget areas. And typically that input, I think last year, is requested from committees by the week before town meeting week, so the last week of February. And also typically, I mean, policy committees are welcome to review the entire budget and to pass along recommendations, prioritizations on any part of the budget to House of Appropriations. But historically, I believe House Appropriations kind of portion of control over the budget or input has been B700 to 713. That's roughly speaking ANR's policy items within the budget. So as you hear about the governor's recommended FY27 proposal, part of your task will be to decide what you all agree with, what you disagree with, and what your priorities within your budget area are, both within the budget and from any bills, funding requests, advocate requests that you all might be hearing from throughout the budget cycle. I would just say, as you compile your committee letter to House Appropriations, which again, I think you'll anticipate sending by the end of February, the most useful way from the Appropriations Committee point of view to structure that letter is tiered recommendations or some kind of prioritized list. I think heading into FY27, there's a general awareness that this will be a much tighter budget year than some previous years, and so there will be harder decisions to make. And often the input that the Appropriations Committee receives from the policy committees will be recommendations to fund certain items in the GovRec or from outside entities, but not necessarily saying, first we prioritize this. If we can do that, then we move on to the second set of priorities. And if we can fully meet those, here's a third set of priorities. When the committee receives kind of an unprioritized, not kind of contingent, organized list of recommendations, it's much harder for them to be in the room at 10:30 p.m. the week that the budget is getting finalized, weighing which items to fund and not fund. So to the extent that the committee is able to say, our first priority is this, or this bucket of appropriations, and our second priority is this bucket of appropriations, I think that would be really useful for the Appropriations Committee. And I have examples of prior committee letters that can help inform that if the committee would like to see those. Let me stop. I've been talking for a while. Yeah, I would happy to take any questions.
Representative Austin.
Yeah. Are there any intersections with other committees in terms of that we would need to know about what other committees are asking for, or that would influence what we were asking for? Or is it pretty siloed?
I suppose it would depend on the bill, right? Certainly if a bill, I could see, there's often kind of shared jurisdiction between House Environment and House Agriculture. I can think of some examples of that from last year, housing. So I would say it's case by case and up to kind of the discretion and judgment of the policy committees on when it's appropriate to coordinate with other policy committees and what information you're all gathering. But yeah, I think joint testimony, joint hearings on areas of interest can often be an efficient way to get everybody in the room who needs to be hearing information, right? Any other questions so far? I know that this is rather general so far. So that being said, priorities. Okay, great. So send a list of prioritized appropriation requests to House Appropriations in your committee letter. How do you arrive at that list of priorities? You're about to get a lot of information from the administration, right? You're going to get base appropriation requests, one-time appropriation requests. You're going to see ups and downs as part of the committees, as part of the departments and agencies' testimonies. So how do you make sense of all that information and condense that down into concise, responsive committee letter? that is what the memo I've passed out to you all hopes to kind of help elucidate for you. I would remember first and foremost that your time with the departments and agencies is precious, right? The budget cycle is very short and very condensed, and there's a lot of information to take in. You're going to hear the administration's priorities, which are not always the legislature's priorities, right? And so you'll be hearing from the administration about their recommendations. You can take those, leave those, you can adjust them up or down, leave things on the table. I would say that when you hear from the agencies and departments, one thing that we've observed is that the agencies often jump straight to solutions, assuming that the committee is familiar with all of the relevant background for the problem. And that unstated background and context isn't always helpful to the committee conversation. So I would advise you all to not hesitate to ask the committee, or ask the agency or department, hold up, what is the underlying problem here? What are we trying to address with this proposal? And what happens if we do nothing, right? We have finite resources to spread between many problems that we're trying to solve. And so even if you're leaning or inclined towards accepting a request from the administration, it's always helpful to ask the question, well, devil's advocate, what happens if we do nothing? Who suffers? What needs go unmet? That sort of thing. And that kind of helps guide your prioritization exercise. I also think it's important for you all to consider when you're hearing from the administration what evidence exists about this problem, right? Like, what is the data available to you to define the problem that you're trying to solve? What is the evidence that this request is responsive to the problem you're identifying, right? How did you come up with this particular funding number? Is it base or is it one time? If it's a one-time appropriation, how far into the future will that one-time appropriation solve a problem that may be recurring over future years? Madam Chair, would it be helpful to talk at all about base versus one-time appropriations?
Sure would.
Okay, so these are phrases you all hear a lot over the course of the budget cycle. Forgive me if any of you are familiar with this already, but a base appropriation essentially represents the foundation of a department or agency's budget that's carried over from a previous year, right? I'll revisit that in a moment, but one-times are appropriations that are made for just one fiscal year. Maybe they're given carry forward authority by appropriators, such that any of the unused spending authority from one fiscal year will carry over automatically into the next. But generally, a one-time appropriation is a pot of money that an agency is getting for just one fiscal year. And then base is, again, that kind of foundation that's rolled over from one year to the next. The distinction between these two categories can get a little bit fuzzy, right? For example, a one-time appropriation might be made again the next year and again the next year. And as expectations for a department or agency increase, right, as the expectations for them to solve a problem increase, you'll often find one-times do eventually make their way into a base appropriation for a department or agency in a subsequent fiscal year to those kinds of creeping expectations on the department or agency. So that's worth considering when considering one-time appropriations. What kind of precedent is this going to set? Do we think this is going to truly be a one-time appropriation? Is this something that should be considered as part of the department's base? The other thing that is I would flag about base, it can be hard to unwrap that onion, right? Like the base budget of a department or agency has accreted over many years in many cases. And there are a lot of past policy decisions that have been made, oftentimes years or decades ago, that are reflected in that base budget as it's developed over years. It can be difficult to disentangle, but I would encourage you all at your discretion as you have time, if an appropriation request seems to implicate a certain part of a department's base, go ahead and ask that question. How long has this program been in place? When was the last time it was revisited? Do we still need this program? Could these resources from this program be reallocated to a new request that you're making this year or a new need that's being identified? It can often, even for JFO, digging into a department's base can often be kind of an involved exercise. So feel free to ask JFO for assistance, and also I would encourage you all to press the departments and agencies as needed to give you additional information on what's reflected in their base and the histories behind that. I'll also add, Chair Shy from House Appropriations would definitely want me to reiterate. In the past, I think a lot of department and agency budget testimony has really revolved around this ups and downs conversation. You all might be familiar with this. You get a spreadsheet that represents all the various line items in an agency's base, and it might be 10 pages long, 15 pages long, and the other columns are just indicating whether that appropriation or that line item is going up or down and by how much and how that compares to previous years. I think that's part of a useful budget submission, but what House Appropriations is trying to convey to policy committees this year is, and they've been working with the agencies on this, don't accept just the ups and downs as part of a budget testimony. And I think the agencies that you all will be hearing from have been working well to try and wrap their arms around this and meet this request. Budget testimony is a storytelling opportunity for agencies and departments. They should be going into detail on the history of each individual line item so that you all can consider ongoing prioritization instead of, well, we did this much last year, so let's increase it by 3% and call it a day, right? There are more prioritization and history stories to be told from departments and agencies than the mere ups and downs. So your instructions or requests from House Appropriations is do not accept testimony that is just the ups and downs. I don't think that will be a problem here, but I'm conveying that to you from House Appropes. I'll pause for any questions.
Representative Pritchard.
Do any of these departments or agencies zero-based budget? Any of them?
I think the departments and agencies follow the, instructions from the governor and then the central offices of the administration, right? That's kind of how this all kicks off. They receive at the very beginning of the budget cycle, which, by the way, starts about 9 months before you all even see a budget submission, what their guidelines and constraints are from the administration that year. I think this year we all heard from the governor in his budget address. I'll get the exact number wrong, but something like the goal was 3%, no more than 3% increase across agencies and departments. I think that was the guiding principle this particular year. I think they'll more or less take their marching orders from folks in the administration.
But that 3% was all organic. So to me, that meant there was no increase, essentially.
In that it was keeping up with cost increases. Yeah, I'm afraid to answer your question more succinctly, I don't know if, that's been done in the past specifically, but the short answer is it's, per the priorities of the administration from one year to the next.
Representative Norton.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation. This is helpful since I'm on the little subcommittee here that's going to be writing that letter to you. So it's great. Yeah, thank you. One of the questions that I have when we go through this budget process, and I'm relatively new to this, but how do we get accountability information from agencies and maybe we can get some from JFO, like what was actually spent and what was actually accomplished relative to what was planned based on what was spent the previous year? In other words, they asked for a certain amount, did they accomplish what they planned to do based on what they spent? And how many dollars flow through the agency and go out to non-governmental agencies or organizations? And how do we get accountability information from them on how much they spent on actually helping Vermonters or how much went to their administration and overhead? And how do we get all that accountability information?
Sure. I would say there are various ways of getting that information from departments and agencies, depending on what specific part of the agency you're hoping to look at. Oftentimes, there are legislative reports that they've been required to file, which can be found on the General Assembly webpage. They're usually submitted, this November, December, January. That might report on, how a specific program priority is going. Beyond that, I'm trying to think, accountability and program metrics are a really broad kind of category, right? You should be hearing from the agencies on how their budget has gone up or down from previous years. You should be hearing what they're proposing to do that's new. I would say as part of the committee members' preparation for committee for testimony from a department or agency, look at their budget book from the previous fiscal year, or maybe the fiscal year, the budget book 2 or 3 years ago. Agency budget books are a great source of information and a memorialization of what they propose in a given fiscal year, going back as far as you can find on the committee page. And I'd be happy to walk many members kind of through where you can often find those budget book submissions. But those will help you get a sense of what the major requests and new proposals have been from agencies in recent fiscal years. That enables you to then come to committee prepared to ask, well, I see, 5 years ago, we authorized you to do this. We appropriated this much money. How is that going? Or maybe you can request that information in advance of testimony.
Is that a document that's been called a budget book?
Different departments and agencies will call it different things. For example, the DEVA, Department of Vermont Health Access budget book is DEVA budget book. When it comes to ANR, DEC, they may break that down into different individual submissions for different parts of the agency. I will look into that and kind of and get back to the committee on how they tend to package that information. It could be that DEC, Forest and Parks each do their own budget books from year to year, but I'll look into that and get back to the agency. Again, it's accountability and program metrics and spending metrics, really broad category. I would say preparation before committee into some of the more recent major initiatives and requests from agencies is a great place to start and get a sense of what they've been up to recently, what they've requested, and inform questions as to how those things are going.
Representative Chapin.
Just to further that line of questioning, what about actuals? Like, I understand we can go back and see budgets from previous years. I think one of the big black holes is what was actually spent year to year compared to the budget.
And I think the answer to how you get the actuals information will depend on the form of disbursement of the money, right? Like oftentimes, and we get this question a lot from members, somebody wants to know, this department had a contract with this provider, how much of that contract has been dispersed? And we'll usually have to do a little bit of digging and emailing back and forth with a budget manager in the agency to figure out how much that money has been dispersed. Carry forward reports are something that JFO gets from the Department of Finance and Management every year periodically. That shows what appropriations have been carried forward from previous fiscal year appropriations. That is a source of information about what appropriations still have spending authority on the table that departments haven't used. So it's various sources of information. I would say if that's ever a question that you're interested in answering, feel free to reach out to Joint Fiscal or also contacts of the agency who are presenting before you all who can direct you to the source of that information, because it will vary depending on kind of the avenue of disbursement for the money. I would say, was it a direct appropriation to the agency or was it grants is one perfect example of like a distinction that matters in terms of how you find that information. Is that responsive to your question? I know it depends is a frustrating answer, but it does depend. And again, I would encourage you, if it's fiscal related, feel free to reach out to Joint Fiscal as well as budget managers within the agencies.
Do you have another?
Yeah, I was gonna say, what was I gonna say? What about adjustments for BAA every year? So when you go back and look at budget books, where do we see what was in the end, the budget for the year after the BAA?
What was in the adjusted budget? Yeah, I mean, this is a big part of our job at Joint Fiscal is following that breadcrumb trail. Like, what was the original appropriation? Often I have to go into the BAA documents if I'm trying to follow the path of a particular appropriation. It could be that an appropriation went unused, right? Like they're not unused, but maybe there was a balance left in an appropriation that was reverted by the Department of Finance and Management. So when an agency receives an appropriation, there's an outstanding balance on that appropriation. Department of Finance and Management often has broad authority to revert the remainder of that appropriation back to the general fund or to the fund of origin. So it could be that I'm looking through reversion reports from Finance and Management to see how much was reverted of a past appropriation. So again, frustratingly, the answer is it depends, but Joint Fiscal and the budget folks at these agencies should be available to you to help trace those breadcrumbs, because it really is a breadcrumb trail sometimes. And it's not through any fault of the agencies per se. There are dozens often of one-time appropriations that are made by you all, by the General Assembly from one year to the next. Some of them might have carry forward authority indefinitely, carry forward authority just into one fiscal year in the future. All of that plays into kind of the time horizon of when these appropriations might be reverted.
I'm gonna try this one more time. You just said that we should ask you, JFO.
Yes.
I'm asking you now. Can we get, last year when I asked for detailed budget information from ANR, I get this dozens of page document with line items like, we spent this much on staples and we spent this much on copy paper. And it's like, I don't care, about how much they spent on staples and copy paper. What I care about is, because what they talk to us about is programs. Oh, the River Corridor program. At the program level, we intended to accomplish this. We asked for this much money. How much, so we gave you that much money. How much of that did you accomplish? And how much of that money is still left? Oh, you just barely hired 5 of the 8 people that we gave you money to hire. Where's the money for the other 3 people? Or did you hire some contractors? Maybe the money went there, or maybe you went to NGOs. What did they do with it? I mean, how do I get that kind of money, that kind of accountability numbers? And I'm consider this me asking.
Yeah, and I'll say this, oftentimes, so if I were to receive that question from you, what I would likely do is pull out my Rolodex of, let's say in this case, it's A&R contacts, and I would be the one doing that legwork instead of you and saying, sorting through the budget information they send. And I agree, right? Getting like how much money was spent on staples is probably not what you're looking for in a particular context. You are looking for higher order information about how much was spent on a program. And this is another frustrating, it depends answer, but right, depending on what an appropriation was for, how the appropriation was constructed, it goes into the agency's kind of overall appropriations. But maybe it was assigned to a particular DEPT ID, right, within the agency, or a particular line item within the agency that really only makes sense to budget managers who know the individual budget codes, right? And we at JFO are kind of jacks of all trade, masters of none. We know just enough to be dangerous to, sort through that information and say, okay, I think we need to look at like this budget code, that budget code, and that budget code to get a sense of how much of this appropriation was spent for this program. Just to pull up the hood a little bit about how that information is often found. It involves sorting through, I would say, arcana of financial documents and kind of financial administration.
So maybe JFO isn't the right, I mean, should we make this request of Julie Moore? And just say, give us the budget in that format. I don't care about the staples and copy paper. I want to know by program, how much is spent, what did you accomplish? I mean, is that a fair question? Or should I ask that question? I'm trying to understand. Are you the right organization for me to ask these questions, or do I go to the agency secretary?
I think from your committee's point of view, there's both in general, setting expectations with the agency about what kind of information you'd like to receive in what format will set you up for success. And that is what the other document I meant to reference, which is also posted on your webpage, is House Appropriations did send out updated guidance to departments and agencies this year to inform how they package their information to all of you, make it more responsive, anticipate your questions better. So communicating with the agency in advance of testimony or at the beginning of a budget cycle, or whatever the subject is, will help them answer your questions. They also do have day jobs and are administering their programs, and so they may not always be able to compile all the bulk of the information that you might want on the timetable you need it. But I would say set expectations according with the administration in advance of major testimony. If it comes to a specific program, right, that's when or set of programs, that's when I would consider maybe reaching out directly to JFO. We work for you all, right? Secretary Moore is wonderful, but she works within the executive branch, is very busy. JFO is also very busy, but we work for you all directly. And so if you have a specific question that we can help dig into, I would say reach out to us if it's about a specific program or appropriation, and we'll dig in and kind of uncover the history for you. Because that's our job, is to support you all with your decision-making and information gathering.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How accurate is AI? I mean, honestly, I ask AI 100 questions, but I keep asking questions, and this is public information, right? So, I'm hearing that it's 93% or 95% accurate. I'm just wondering, would that be one way to ask questions to get reliable information, or to at least be able to begin to navigate?
I would be very cautious about using AI in the specific it's useful in many, many cases. In the context of the state budget, specific departmental information, certain, data just isn't publicly available. It's not scrapable by the AI, right? AI is one giant scraping machine. It takes information off the internet and repackages for you in ways that are not always accurate. And especially in this case where there are so many intricacies of the state budget process that are unique to Vermont. They differ from state to state. They're unique to each agency and department. And some of the agency some of the information lives on a hard drive at the National Life Building and is not online for the AI to scrape.
That's what I just was wondering.
Yeah.
A few more years.
Yeah, I would be very cautious about relying on AI for policy summaries, budgetary information.
Is there any future where the actual budget statutory language we pass is actually in English and followable?
Great question.
I mean, I'm hoping this sort of change is going to move us in that direction because I find it to be impenetrable.
You are not the only one to feel that way.
Yeah.
And it's hard, right? Because it's the juncture of two things. It's legalese and accounting and fiscal management, like two famously inaccessible and kind of dry areas. I don't know if it will ever be totally readable and interpretable to the lay audience, not that you all are a lay audience. There's a certain amount of technical complexity that will always be there. I think
is it like personnel services or whatever it's called? It's really like it's obfuscating what it's doing. It feels obfuscating to me.
Are you referring to the big bill itself,
Yeah.
the statutory text?
Yeah. I mean, it's gotten better with the spreadsheets and the way we're doing it on the floor is a lot better. It's still very hard to follow the page we're on and the presentations and it's a pretty big lift.
And as a somewhat new addition to the JFO myself, I can empathize, right? When you're hearing about direct applications and transfers and one-time bases, it can feel almost intentionally obfuscatory because so much is so specific. At least speaking on behalf of House Appropriations, I can assure you it's not. Chair Shai's,
I know she's trying to make it.
Right, but in terms of the actual technical document itself, right?
I mean, if we just used English, we would understand it better in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I would take it up with the lawyers who write the actual bill. I will say JFO is available to help translate. I know that your committee does a lot of really good, important work. Interaction with JFO is limited to, bills with direct fiscal impacts, those appropriations, revenue raising mechanisms. But that being said, we do exist to assist all committees and all members of the legislature. So
will you have, will we have a JFO liaison?
yes, it varies based on subject area and bill. It would have been me last year as a member of the revenue team. This year, I would say Pat Titterton or Ted Barnett would be the kind of fiscal analysts who would be working on, and actually Ted Barnett will most likely be the fiscal analyst working on bills with you all. And I'll be assisting with our natural resource portfolio this year as well for fiscal notes and related support. But the truth is, Ted Barnett, myself, good points of contact for bills that might come before you all, fiscal questions. Anybody at JFO, we're a small shop, we have about 18 people. You can reach out and your request will reach the right person. But I would encourage you all to start with, Ted Barnett and myself if you have questions, and our emails are on the JFO webpage under contact information.
Thank you so much.
One more flag, just that we did host, House Appropriations hosted 2 budget workshops this year, previously in January. The recordings are online on YouTube. The slides are posted online. Encourage you all to take a look if you weren't able to make those sessions.
You happen to go to that, Rob?
I did, it was at the same time as.
Stream them during dinner time.
Yeah, I'm going to.
During what, dinner time? Representative Shai did those, right?
Yeah, I did go and get the big blue book she was handing out, the prize, those were the prizes she was talking about, big, huge full printout of
the budget.
Of the whole budget.
And one more note on contacts. On the House Appropriations Committee, Representative Squirrel is your kind of budget buddy, your liaison. So he's another resource to you for questions on interacting with House Appropriations.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks so much for joining us. That we are